Hi, everyone. I think you're all coming in, so I'm just gonna say welcome and give everybody a few minutes to get settled in. It's a little over 8:30, but I think a lot of people are here. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Debbie Schwartz. I'm the founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 Facebook group. And tonight we're going to have a fun night. We're going to talk to Ron Lieber, the author of The Price You Pay for College, and we'll talk a little bit about his book. And then we've got three parents who are really going to be the ones asking Ron questions. And then at the end, in addition, I've got some other questions that people have sent in. So we're going to try and cover a lot tonight. So there's a few more people in the waiting room. I'm just going to let them get in.
Oh, wait, here we go.
And yeah, let me do some housekeeping while we're waiting. This is recorded and it's actually being streamed to Facebook at the same time that we are doing this in Zoom. So the recording will be on Facebook, but I'll also send out a follow-up email with the link to the YouTube recording if you want to watch that. This is technically a meeting. This is not a webinar. I only say that because everybody, you can see each other if you want to put yourself on video. We really ask that you stay muted, unless there's something pressing you want to tell us. And, I'm also good with people interrupting, but as long as you can stay muted as long as possible, because we do hear background noise and you should have come in muted. So, we're going to be watching if you unmute yourself and there's too much noise, we can automatically mute you back. So, but just wanted to tell you that that's how this meeting works. And in addition, there is a chat, and feel free to ask questions in the chat. Feel free if there are other people who want to answer the questions. So, use the word chat, talk back and forth. If somebody knows information to answer somebody's questions, I'm all for it. Go ahead and share their information. Okay. So let's get started. So I'm really happy to have Ron back with us. We did do a session with Ron when his book first came out. What has it been now, like about 3 months, Ron, that it's been out?
Almost, yeah. The book came out at the end of January.
So, and here's the book, The Price You Pay for College. I actually know a lot of people who are on here who have bought the book and read it because they've been sending me like emails saying, I'm finishing up Ron's book. And so it's great for all the people who have read it, but if you haven't read it, definitely go out and get it because it's worthwhile. And we're just going to touch on some of the topics. There's so much more in the book, but for those of you who don't know Ron, but I would imagine a lot of you do, I'll just give you a quick background. Ron is also the Your Money columnist at the New York Times, and he's been doing that since 2008. Before the Times, he wrote a personal finance column for the Wall Street Journal. And he's also written some other books. The one before The Price You Pay for College was called The Opposite of Spoiled, Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, Smart About Money. And that was also a New York Times bestseller. And then the book before that was about gap years. And it was officially called Taking Time Off, Inspiring Stories of Students Who Enjoyed Successful Breaks from College and How You Can Plan Your Own. So you've been busy, Ron. And just to say, you're also a father of two, a high schooler and a younger child as well. So I think you are going to, the pain of what some people are going through, and you're going to know it personally very soon. So I just wanted to ask you before we bring on the parents. I heard you talk a little bit about the name, The Price You Pay for College, and kind of how you came up with it or what the story is behind it. And I'm kind of curious for you to share with other people, how that came to be.
Sure. So first of all, let me say thank you to you, but also to all 563 of you who are at least half paying attention right now. I found the Facebook group indispensable when I was first getting started with this research. In fact, before I even was sure it was a book or what kind of book it would be. So let me start by saying thank you. This is one of those communities in the world that kind of proves the adage that none of us are as smart as all of us. And I found so much inspiration just in watching the questions that all of you were asking for years now, really trenchant questions, angry questions, probing questions, funny questions, just watching and observing, the mindset of all of you as you approach this in a way that I would not be able to fully understand or inhabit until I actually do it myself, was truly indispensable. And so I'm intensely grateful to everyone in the community, for allowing me to peer over your shoulder and occasionally pitch in. So the story of the title, there's really two parts, kind of a medium length part and then a very short part. The medium length part comes from the fact that the book was inspired in no small part by all of the email I would get each spring from New York Times readers who had seen that I'd been writing for years about how to save for college and 529 plans. And they had seen for years that I was writing about how to pay for college or how not to pay for college, as the case may be, writing a lot about student loans and the problems with the public service loan forgiveness program and various repayment programs in particular. And they started writing me with, different versions of the same question. They were basically saying, look, smart Alec, we've read all the stuff that you've read, but the other thing that your newspaper can't shut up about is the fact that we live in the era of big data. And, if my kid is into Northwestern at $300,000 because we earn $260,000 as a family, don't qualify for any need-based aid, but, we can't go around writing $80,000 checks and sending them to Evanston, Illinois each year, right? So, we've got this kid who's managed to shoot the lights out and get into Northwestern, and they want us to pay all $300,000 over 4 years. And then the kid's also into, Lawrence University in Wisconsin, a great, smaller liberal arts school. They're going to discount with merit aid to 200. And then, our kid also got into the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, a, very good flagship public state university, probably not in the top 5 in the United States, maybe not even the top 10, but a really good one, right? And that's going to cost us, well, Illinois is a fiscal basket case, right? So that's going to cost now $30,000 a year. And so where is the big data and the big data set that can explain to me why Northwestern is $100,000 better than Lawrence and why Lawrence is $80,000 better than Champaign, right? And I thought, wow, that data set doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because the schools don't want it to exist, not because it couldn't be created. And what these folks are asking is an entirely new personal finance question. And we personal finance writers, we don't get big honking new questions very often, right? So for all of the ink that I had spilled over the questions of what to pay and how to pay, I missed the most important question of all, at least to me, which is, which is what to pay for college, right? Not how to save, not how to pay, but what to pay. That was a value question. It was a values question. And there was no way that I was going to be able to answer it in 1 or 5 or 10 newspaper columns. So that's how the book came to be. And for a long time, we were calling it What to Pay for College, but the publisher found that a little lacking, needed pizzazz, didn't have enough energy. And it took us months to crack the code, but thank God for Bruce Springsteen. I just happened to be listening one day when The Price You Pay came on. And I thought, oh, that's it. I'm gonna rip the title off from Bruce Springsteen. And I did. And that's how we got to The Price You Pay for College.
Well, I gotta tell you, and I mean, that's, a good, a lot of personal, insight behind it, but I actually think there's like a second message. I don't know, maybe you didn't intend it or not, because like, I feel like there's a societal message, by the title.
Right. I mean, there was some beauty in that, right? That would imply like, what price are you paying, not just in dollars, but
Right.
in in what is the emotional cost, right? It's
Right.
on many levels, right? What
And
is the
then what,
emotional
as
cost?
a society, like
And
what are
then
we
what is the
paying?
societal cost, right?
Yeah.
And it leads very quickly to all these cosmic questions. What exactly do we owe our children, right, in the way of sacrifice? And what does our government and what does our nation owe us and our teenagers in this regard? You can have a lot of conversations around those questions. I chose, for better or for worse, to be almost entirely practical. All right. The policy stuff I write about sometimes in the newspaper, but here I just wanted to help people, confront and conquer the system as it exists. Because I figure if enough of us learn to beat the system, maybe eventually we'll blow it up, right? And then we'll get something better. But in the meantime, we've got to do what we've got to do with what's in front of us.
100%. That's why I think we always connected so well, because that's the way I felt too. I felt like I was not going to be able to change the system, but at the best I could educate everybody about the system, and maybe then collectively there would be influence. So we say that, and I'm kind of like a little bit speaking for you too, Ron, because I think if we collectively come together, and this is also the power of the Facebook group, or just people sharing their information. If you see something that doesn't make sense that a school is doing, like let people know. Like don't be afraid to post it someplace. And I know, Ron, you've always been looking for the schools. I guess if somebody says they're not going to come, early decision, if they are actually say do something to the high school, like you're always looking for people to kind of like share if something shady is happening, so that you could look into it.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I believe early decision is classist, and I believe early decision is not binding. I don't think it's legally binding. I don't think it's ethically binding. I think you have every right to turn down an early decision offer if it's not affordable and you have not been able, to figure out, particularly on the merit aid side, what kind of offer you might be on the table for you if you were to get in. If the school is not doing anything in the way of merit aid predictability and you need merit aid to make it affordable, and you apply early decision and you don't get it, you should be able to walk away. And a lot of what we hear on the boards is, oh, but if I do that, my college counselor, at the high school will freak, right? Because I'll be ruining it for all of the kids in the years that come after. And, I spent years lapping America, testing that theory out with the vice presidents of enrollment managements that I spoke to when I visited the schools. And they all laughed when I said that. They said the people who believe that that's true don't understand most of our positions in the marketplace, which is we can't afford to get a reputation in the community and in the 20 towns around it for holding grudges against people who decide that they can't afford our school, right? That's not how this works, right? We're trying to put heads in beds, and we can't get a reputation like that. And so I keep waiting for someone to prove to me that kids have been punished the following year because somebody broke an early decision commitment. If you know of a case that's like documentable and we can put it on the record, great, because then let's call out the school for doing that. But if that doesn't actually happen, then let's stop telling people that it's true, because I don't think that it is. But if I'm wrong, I'd love to know, and in which case we should write about that.
Right. So anything you want, Ron to know, he's open. So I'm going to switch it. We have 3 parents tonight. If people are members of the Facebook group, hopefully you will probably recognize these parents' names, because they've been extremely helpful in in sharing their own knowledge. They respond to a lot of people's questions. And so I'm kind of handing the mic off to them to ask that they can ask Ron questions. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to bring on George Schneiderman. And if anybody recognizes it, I joked with George the other day that he actually should be called George EFC Schneiderman, because he has given presentations to the group on the EFC. He's written up documents about it. So, but he knows a lot more besides EFC, and he's not even in the college space. So I'm gonna pass it off to George, and George, it's all yours to ask Ron whatever questions you want.
I'm a little scared.
So I'm going to try and share my screen
Mm-hmm.
if I can. See if that worked. So yeah, I am kind of known as a data guy. So I thought I would ask you some data questions about things you might have picked up over your time writing the book. And I hope I'm not putting you too much on the spot. If you don't have good answers, that's okay. But I've looked a lot at the education department data from NCES. I never really know what to make of it. And can you see my screen now?
I can, and we're looking at public on the left and private on the right.
Yeah, specifically, this is UMass Amherst on the left and Amherst College on the right.
Uh-huh.
And one thing I really liked about the book is you wrote a lot about kind of student support services and the like. And I just kind of I don't know what the difference is between academic support and student services and institutional support, what the hell that means. And for me, when I'm buying something, I usually kind of want to know, what am I getting for my money? And even like in the instruction, how do they, so I guess my question is, like, do you think there is something in this kind of data that is useful for parents? And if so, what?
Sure. So I guess a couple things. First of all, you're not the only one who's confused. This is calling to mind at least one very long, but also plain English, or sets of plain English research papers that I read a couple of years ago, that very much questioned which expenses should be in what category, and whether there would be a better way to break this down so that it would be more digestible by regular human being parents, and then also somehow converted into some kind of ranking, so we could see who is actually spending the most on student support. And so you're not the only one who's confused. And I think that the thing that I worry about when looking at a small liberal arts college side by side with the university is, do we know that core expenses per full-time enrollment over on the left at UMass, is that across the entire university, including grad students, or is that just undergraduates?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because if it's not just undergraduates, then it's not apples to apples, because Amherst College only has undergraduates, right? So that's the first thing we need to know. I'd like to think that the iPads data is undergrad only. That would be my guess, but I'm not certain, right? But I guess what you're seeing here is probably what a lot of people intuit, right? When you try and figure out, well, all right, is Amherst really $200,000 better than UMass if you're not going to get any need-based financial aid over at Amherst? And one of the things that you get a lot more of at Amherst than you do at UMass is people and grown-ups, right? And you get, more grown-ups per undergraduate. They're probably paid more at Amherst College, since it's like an elite institution, than they are at UMass. And so if yours is the sort of kid who is going to lean on deans, who is the kind of person who will seek out help, who will develop a relationship with a career counselor and might need mental health assistance, and who's going to want to avail himself or herself of tutoring and the writing center, then this is all to the good. So, this just, I mean, helps us understand, I guess, how many more resources are put to bear. And it's also a reminder for us, right? I mean, if you look at, so it's interesting, right? That UMass spends more on research than Amherst College does. That's a reminder of, what these institutions prioritize. So I don't know. I mean, one way to think about this, right, is like, what are you going to the school for, right? What are you going to college for anyway? Are you going to college for the learning? Are you going to college for the kinship? Are you going to college for just for the credential, right? If you're going to college for the learning, if the score in academic support is 19-3, then there's a pretty good chance that you are going to have more resources available to you if you want to seek out more than exists beyond the classroom. If you're at college for kinship, right, some of those student services are channeled to extracurricular activities and supporting those. And so again, will there be more opportunities to meet people over, finer and finer grained interests? Maybe, right? But if you're going to college for the credential, I mean, it depends what you want to do with it afterwards, right? But I don't know that we get much data here on, whether spending the greater spending at Amherst necessarily leads to a higher reputation. So I guess that's what I see when I, look at those numbers and riff off them.
Okay.
But yeah, it's important to know whether that spending is per undergraduate at UMass or whether it's across everybody.
And things like academic and support and student services. Like I know you wrote a lot about counseling centers and tutoring and all that sort of thing. Do you know, like, how do they, like, what's the difference between those? Or that's an extraordinary amount of money. It's like Amherst College is spending more than $35,000 a year, more than the cost of most in-state flagship attendance on just those two things.
Sure. So it's not clear where physical plant falls in there, and like how the buildings and the maintenance of the buildings and the capital expense and debt service and repayment fits in there.
Ron, you're muted somehow.
I am back. It's not 100% clear to me how the buildings are accounted for in these numbers. So I'm starting to reach the point where I'm speculating and I should probably stop.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In a similar vein, one thing that just doesn't, that I have trouble making sense of, and maybe it's just because I tend to look at, what you're paying versus what you're getting. And when I look at it that way, the paying out of state flagship rates just makes very little sense to me. Like, it seems like you're basically paying private school prices for institutions that are spending public school amounts of money. I wonder if you could talk about that, and like, am I completely off base?
No, I don't think you're off base at all. I mean, sending an out-of-state kid to the University of Michigan to be in the honors program, was very much a thing where I grew up in Chicago in the late 80s and early 90s. And it took a while for the other flagships to catch on, both to building, an internal undergraduate program or college, and then also trying to attract out-of-state students to it. But, the schools are on to you, right? All of the schools that have, used that playbook, like the University of Alabama, or ripped off Alabama's playbook, the way that University of South Carolina is doing right now, or Delaware is big on that, right? Offering merit to out-of-state students. Some of you have experience with other schools too. Arizona State does it some with their honors college. I think they understand you're a psychographic in that way, not a demographic. There is a growing number of value focused college shoppers who want to be shown, right? Like what am I getting here that's going to make this worth it? Because I'm not going to pay 50 grand to send my kid with 50 grand people. Send my kid to a school of 50 grand people, right? I'm gonna, maybe I'll pay out of state rates to send my kid to, school where they can be in a specialized program with 1 or 2,000 other people where, they're patted on the head and told that they're meritorious and maybe thrown a $10,000 coupon a year. I think the schools understand where you're coming from, and I don't disagree with your approach to it. I think all of our approaches should be prove it, right? Show me, like where is the value here? Particularly if the spending per student looks more like the spending at UMass than it does at Amherst College on the right.
Okay, thanks. One of my other places I love to look at is common data set.
Yes.
Yeah. And this I believe is Lawrence College, because you mentioned it earlier. I brought it up.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if you have any tips for parents about sort of how to make sense of this data, especially the need-based versus non-need-based aid, and these kind of arcane directions that says aid that is non-need based but that was used to meet needs should be counted as need-based aid, which I have no idea what exactly that means. Wondering if you figured that out. And also there are tuition waivers. I don't know what the difference is between a tuition waiver and institutional aid. Those seem like the same thing to me. So wondering any tips for how to read the section H of the common data set.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you start here. I tend to start at H2A, and that's maybe not a weakness of my approach, but for better or for worse, I work for upper middle class subscribers. The average print subscriber of the New York Times has a household income of, I don't know, call it $200,000 a year. The digital subscribers, a little bit less, but it's growing, right? And so a lot of those families are firmly in H2A land, right? So if you go down a little bit more, actually, it actually says H2A in the heading.
Oh,
there
we
we
go. Sorry.
go, right? Yeah, so what we're talking about there is people who do not have demonstrated need, who are getting aid anyhow. Right? So this is financial aid for rich people, or, for affluent ones at least. Right? This to me is sort of where the rubber hits the road for a lot of my core customers at my day job. Because these are people who, have been lucky and have worked really hard, and they thought that they were going to arrive at a station in life where they could send their kid anywhere, maybe the way that their parents had done for them. And then all of a sudden they're finding that even though they earn $250,000 a year, they're not going to be able to write these checks. And so they want to know, okay, what's going on at Lawrence anyway? What percentage of the first year students are offered merit aid, even though they have no demonstrated financial need? Oh, look at that. It's 120 of them I didn't look up top, but I don't think the Lawrence freshman class is more than 500 or 600, right? So, we're talking like 25% of the first year class is getting merit aid, and oh my God, they're discounting by $31,000. So that $31,000 figure, I can guarantee you that doesn't appear anywhere on the Lawrence University admissions office website. Why? Because Lawrence is still hoping against hope. Lawrence is still hoping against hope that 6% of the students or 8% of the families, right, will pay full price. Families from outside of the United States, or parents and families who are just desperate, right? Maybe it's alumni kids who've had a difficult run through the first couple of years of high school and are just coming into their own, and the school's taking a chance, but isn't going to discount for them, right? And so, nobody wants to be the only person or among the only people who are paying the high price, right? So the only way to figure out what's going on here is to, do a bunch of math, right? In a bunch of these tables to figure out, okay, you subtract 120 from the total, and then you figure out how many people got need-based aid, and then you add need-based aid plus this 120, and you subtract it from the total, and you're like, oh, only 27 families, right? Paid the full price, or whatever it was that year. I don't know what the numbers are for Lawrence, right? But $31,000, that's significant. And hey, look at that, right? Look over at the right there. See that 27 figure? right? 27 is like a lot less than 31, in financial aid terms, right? So if what that suggests to us is that this school's position is weakening in the marketplace, right? If it's having to offer 31 instead of 27 to the most recent class, that means that like your odds next year are probably going to be pretty good, unless this was an anomaly, right? So, you can start to tease out some trends, right? And begin to think, okay, well, if 31 is the average, right? And then you can look elsewhere and see where your kid's SAT score or GPA falls in the range. You can start to think, wow, my straight A student here, maybe they'd get into Northwestern off the wait list, but I can send them to Lawrence, which is a great school, committed faculty, terrific people there at, whatever the list price is, 68,000 minus 31 or 34 or 38 or wherever my straight A kid gets offered. And all of a sudden that starts to look pretty similar, that bottom line number, to what they would pay at Champaign-Urbana. And I'm starting to feel pretty good about that. And yet they hide it here, where we've got to do a bunch of backflips, and Ron and George and 634 people have to like sit here and squint on the screen to try and figure out how to decipher this. It's crazy.
That's great. Thank you. That was super helpful.
Thank you, George, and hope he didn't stump you too much, Ron, with the numbers. And let's see, how do we get the stop share?
I can pause. Oh, there we go.
Okay, great. And for people, and I'm just going to like summarize because I saw a lot of the comments, for people who aren't even familiar, IPEDS is government data that colleges have to report to the government. And there's, I don't even know how many, like got to be over 300, variables of different pieces of data that get sent. And then the common data set is information that colleges report to, technically to three organizations, to the College Board, to a company called Peterson's, and U.S. News and World Reports. And U.S. News has used that information to do a lot of their rankings, but anybody can Google a school's common data set with just the name, whatever, like Villanova University common data set, and you can, look at all of that data. And this, along with Ron and George, I always look at the H2 section, which tells a lot about the financial aid information, but there's other sections that are also really valuable. But anyhow, that's like a whole nother deep dive discussion. So I'm going to switch and bring on Leanne Cantrell, who's another parent in the Paying for College 101 group. And she has an amazing son, and Leanne has for many years shared information about visits that she's gone on before the pandemic. And I know her son is a senior, high school senior, and I know that she has a lot of questions. And I also saw them in the chat related to appealing, because that's the season that we're in right now, with all the offers that have come through. And I know, Ron, you had a whole chapter in your book about appeals. So I'm going to pass it off to Leanne, and she'll ask her questions.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Ron, before I ask these questions, I owe you an apology. I have been in the group Paying for College 101 for 2.5 years now. And as Debbie indicated, my son is a senior. When your book came out, I thought, where were you a year ago? Okay. I know all this. I know how to go through the FISC guide in order to find some sort of academic ratings that are not related to US World News Report or whatever it's called. I also knew that the common data set was a great piece of information for me relative to what percentage of non-need kids, are going to receive merit and what the average amount that was. So when I finally bowed up and went into the book, the audio book, I was wrong. I mean, you are here just in the nick of time. So if there's other parents out there of seniors, and if you are still in the throes of approaching decision day on May 1st, I'm telling you, if you can get your hands on it or even borrow it from the library or the audio library, I would do it. I've got 3 questions, and they are in the category of what you called at one point, the extreme sport of chasing merit. And I've got to say that if it is an extreme sport, then you need to be the coach for our cage fighting, because the roadmap that you've laid out in the book for how to do this, how not to feel bad or sycophantic, like a supplicant going to the admissions people or financial aid, I think it's spot on. I also appreciated when you talked about the history of when families actually started applying very widely instead of just applying to one or two schools. And I think that you said that it was called a plague of people selfishly seeking security. That cracked me up, because I think that a lot of us here are that plague.
Yeah,
so
that's what the admissions people called it.
Yes, well, not you,
yeah.
but the historical context was hilarious.
Yeah.
So for those of us who've been in the group for a little while and have seniors, this past fall, Debbie had been advising everyone, look, this is going to be a really unusual year. If you might have initially thought that you would encourage your child to apply to maybe 5 schools, maybe 10 schools, if you're only looking at merit aid, there's just really, as you say, there's no telling what they may or may not get in the way of discount. So kids completely filled out the common application, applied to 20 schools. Mine is guilty of that, but he's a good researcher and applied to only places that he would actually be pretty thrilled to attend. So that was good. But one thing that I noticed in your book, relative to seniors, when you're going into the appeal process, typically when you lead up to receiving the acceptances, there's that thing called demonstrated interest. And we know that certain schools, maybe Tufts or American or Tulane, for example, are well known for saying that you've got to demonstrate interest. I was stunned to hear you in the audiobook say that sometimes too much demonstrated interest works against you. How would you address that?
It's not quite clear how to address it. So here's where that comes from. We're behind the scenes at nearly every institution. There is a consulting firm advising on how to price and how to discount. There's just a large handful of them doing this work. They've got a bunch of PhD engineers running around behind the scenes, sucking up every bit of data about you, your family, every other family that's applying, all of the families that have applied for the last umpteen years, all of the kids who've gone to that school, what grades they've gotten, what grades they had in high school, have they stayed, have they transferred, have they flunked out? And they're sucking all this data in, hoovering it up and plugging it into these like sort of custom made algorithms. So these merit aid offers that all of you with seniors are getting right now, those are, for the most part, aren't coming from people. They're coming from software. And if you're appealing it, often the first time the human being you're talking to will have seen the offer is when they're discussing it with you on the appeal. Now, this is not always the case, as many of you know. Some state institutions and privates that are a little more hard up for students will be transparent sometimes, and they'll have sort of a grid. University of Alabama does this, right? You kind of know exactly what you need to get whatever offer. But at a lot of the other institutions, particularly the more selective private ones that offer merit, there's no predictability, and there's software doing all the work of making the offers or making the first offers. And so then the question becomes, just how much are they paying attention to your child's behavior? Well, it turns out that they know which emails they're opening, how quickly they're opening it. Same thing with text messages. Have they looked at Instagram ads that they're being served? And all of this kind of gets fed into the beast. And so the natural question to ask is it possible to appear so eager that the school will, or that the algorithm will effectively lowball you, because too much demonstrated interest plus being from an affluent zip code means this family is kind of like an easy get, right? And I tried to pin down every one of these consulting firms, to say, can you say to me for sure that you've never done this or that a school has never asked you to? And I could not get them to, deny it out of hand. So can I point to a particular institution that does it? No. Do I believe that it happens? Yes. Am I naturally inclined to be a cynic or a conspiracy theorist? I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm sort of a 6 or a 7, right? Just ask yourself this, right? If you were in the shoes of a school that has to be very careful with how it sort of marshals and distributes resources, would you really want to make an uneconomic offer to a kid who was showing all sorts of signs of being intensely interested in coming to your school, who was also from an affluent zip code, right? Because you think that they don't know anything about you if you're not applying for need-based aid. But zip code +4 is absolutely a code for affluence. It's highly predictive, right? So if you're in the shoes of these VPs of enrollment managements or the people who are writing the algorithms, you're thinking, nah, I'm not going to make the bigger offer to the kid who's showing lots of demonstrated interest from the most affluent zip code. That doesn't really make any economic sense. Why would you waste money that way, right? So it's, if you've got your thinking cap on and you're on the other side of the table, you're absolutely using demonstrated high interest as a way to shave a couple $1,000s off your merit offer. So I believe it happens. I have not been able to prove it demonstrably.
I just find that fascinating because there's, sort of rules of thumb that have come about, predominantly what I've read with the thousands and thousands of parents weighing in saying, oh my gosh, my student had, all of these wonderful attributes, but got deferred or waitlisted or denied and so forth. And they were constantly in contact with so-and-so. And, maybe they got in, but they didn't get what they expected. So that's interesting. It seems like it's a fine line. My second question, relative to the extreme sport of chasing merit, has to do relative not to just seniors, but also juniors. You were talking in the book about the various rankings that come out, and if families are trying to figure out, well, is this school worth more than the other? If we can afford to pay, X dollars for this one, should we take the freebie or should we take that one? I had never heard of what you call the Alumni Factor rankings, which shows the actual outcomes from the schools. I've tried to find that in other places, and this is brand new. Can you tell us about the Alumni Factor rankings?
Yeah, so my very first job I've always worked for the business section or business magazines. And back in the 90s, before I really found my way to personal finance, I worked for Fortune and I worked for Fast Company. So, magazines that are kind of at the heart of business management and business strategy. And right around then was when I first heard of something called the Net Promoter Score, which was invented by one of the fancy consulting firms that starts with a B, either Bain or Boston Consulting Group. Someone in the comments will probably know. Anyway, the Net Promoter Score was like a very simple thing. And the big idea was that, you go to your customers, you go to your best customers, or the people who you think are your best customers, your most high value customers, and you ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our product or our service to somebody else, right? And then they built, billions of dollars of consulting off the answer to that question. And at some point early on in my research, I was like, what the hell? Where is the Net Promoter Scores for colleges? How come we don't know anything about customer satisfaction 1 year's out, 5 year out, 10 years out? Are gay people more or less satisfied than heterosexual people? Are Black people less satisfied or more satisfied than white people? Are people with debt more or less satisfied? Are the rich people more satisfied than the poor people, or vice versa? Where is this stuff? This is the biggest financial decision we're ever making. How do we not have a Consumer Reports for this? U.S. News is not Consumer Reports. U.S. News is not afterwards. U.S. News mostly measures input, a little bit about what happens there, and very little about output, and let alone surveying people and seeing how they feel about it. So this just, bothered me to no end. And then towards the very end of my research, I stumbled into this thing called the Alumni Factor, which basically doesn't exist anymore. And for reasons that are still not clear to me, never gained a lot of traction. But back in 2012, 2013, a couple of people went out and built this data set. I think they hired SurveyMonkey, one of the good online survey research companies, and got, enough statistically relevant data on maybe the 300 or 400 or 500 most selective colleges and universities in America, and got people to, recent alumni to start ranking them. And what they found was pretty surprising, right? Turns out that undergraduates at Yale and Princeton are super happy with the experience that they've had, kind of less so at Penn and Dartmouth, and Columbia is ranked like 99th or 106, right?
Wow.
So, all Ivy League schools are not alike. Turns out that the service academies, all 4 or 5 of them are, in the top 15 or 20. People, turns out, like going to school for free. They like the esprit de corps, and they don't mind the, slight chance of death that will result in, having to join the armed forces for 3 or 4 years after graduation. Turns out not to be a big problem with satisfaction. There are a couple of religious schools, including one that I had basically never heard of that, are in the top 15 there, right? And lots of extremely desirable schools like NYU, Northeastern, way down in the rankings. This was fascinating to me. So somebody new owns the operation now, and they keep threatening to come out with a whole bunch of new data. They said they were going to do it by the beginning of this year. Hasn't happened yet. Hope they will. I'm going to write about it in the Times when they do. Meanwhile, there is more than one entity. Well, Gallup in particular has all of this data already because they've been doing a ton of survey research on and around college, and they know where people went to school. They could drop this anytime they want. They haven't done it yet because I don't think they don't want to make enemies. They want to be able to sell their survey work to anybody and everybody. But they've got the data, right? So this is like gettable. This is doable. For the venture capitalists in the crowd, I don't know, do you want to give me $10 million to do this? It's sort of tempting to go and try and get the Times to do it. But I don't know. I mean, does the world need another college ranking? Well, maybe it needs a better college ranking.
Better would be better, for sure. And then that brings me to my last question. And this is really on behalf of the juniors and the sophomores and even the freshmen. As I pulled up my Bible here, the Fisk Guide earlier, that was one of the ways in which my senior started targeting schools to investigate. And what he had done as a sophomore, we had no idea, he was a good student, but not tippy top. He went ahead and took the ACT and the SAT as a sophomore just to see where he was, just a ballpark feel. We were going on some vacations to grandma's house, and we thought, well, if your scores are super duper low, then it's kind of a waste of time to go see, Georgetown or Duke, right? So we did that initially. And by seeing those scores and then using the Fisk guide that said, okay, here's that 50 percentile bracket. If my son's score as a sophomore was kind of towards the top quartile, we figured ballparkish that by the time he was a junior, he would be bumped over there. And then, of course, we used the data from the common data set that said, oh, gosh, 19% of kids get merit. We kind of did that loosey-goosey estimation.
Yeah.
Now, the Fisk guide is no longer going to have that 50 percentile bracket for ACT and SAT scores. They are cutting that out in their next edition.
Why?
So if you have a kid, how is he or she going to ballpark the direction of their focus? I mean, if you just use GPA, if GPA were a stable and consistent metric, if you will, across the nation, across the world, that could work. But as we all know, it's not consistent. So what are the kids who are juniors and sophomores going to do next year as far as targeting schools?
You know, Leanne, here's what I want for you and for everybody else listening. I want everybody else to have, I want everyone to have a much stronger sense of entitlement to this information, because we talk about this like it's a mystery and we're all supplicants. Just call the freaking school and ask, right? Like, my kid's interested in coming to your school. We might write you a check for $300,000, right? Or maybe we might get some merit aid. We don't know, right? But can you please just like tell us, you know, what this bracket looks like that that Fisk no longer publishes? I mean, why wouldn't a school give that information out? And if they won't, there's something wrong with them, right? And go running, right? Because it's like they're going to keep this to themselves when you're thinking about spending this much money. I hope not, right? And the other thing is you can go into the common data set and find out. The common data set tells you what the range of scores are in the top 25th percentile, I'm pretty sure, right, Debbie? I see you nodding. Right, so, you know, now, you know, there's a handful of schools that don't publish the common data set, but this information is gettable, even if Fisk is cutting it for its own reasons. But really, like, we shouldn't be, you know, sort of scratching our heads and puzzling it out here. We should just call the schools and ask. We are entitled to this information. If they're going to discount partly on the basis of test scores, right, then they should tell us what the range is of test scores that, you know, end up offering discounts. And I know, right, what they're going to say is, oh, well, this is a holistic process, right? Maybe
Yes.
it is, right? And maybe it changes from year to year. Fine, right? Publish the data, or at least hand it over to me with a big fat 24 font disclaimer that says past performance is not an indication of future results, right? Just tell us that, you know, the last year's data may not look like next year's data. I mean, we're grown-ups, we know this, right? Last year's admissions data might not look like next year's admissions data. Just give us the freaking data, right? We should not feel like we cannot ask for it. In fact, we should challenge ourselves to ask for all of it and more.
Yep, no, I agree. And thank you, Leanne. These are great questions. And I guess, and I'll just add in a little bit from what I know, the colleges actually still have the test score information. They're still making it, quote, public. It's just that Fisk has decided that because this year was so test optional, that it's their decisions. It's not the colleges. It's their decisions that they're not going to share it. But I'll tell you, I have that information. We have that in our college insights, and we're keeping it for that reason. We're keeping it to kind of see what last year's ranges were and to compare it to whatever the new ranges are going to be, because that's valuable information too. So I know that there were a lot of questions about appealing. I'm going to ask them after Greg asks his questions, because I do want to kind of help some of the families who are in the process now. But I just wanted to bring on Greg. Again, a lot of people have probably seen Greg Smith's name in the Facebook group. He shares sometimes a little bit more about his family than just paying for college, but that's what we love to hear, those stories. But Greg, I'm going to let you ask your questions to Ron.
Hey, Greg.
First, I'll be brief because I want you guys to get your questions in. First, I want to say I was a little skeptical of the book, and then I read it and I was like, yes. So I want to thank you, and your research is spot on. I am married to a college administrator at a small college. I have a daughter who went to Smith and a son who is at Amherst. And so, you know, your research on small colleges and where people who work at small colleges go, women in science at women's colleges, all of that was spot on. Thank you. And you did something very simple early in the book that was just sort of like a revelation to me for people. And when you said college prices are not transparent, and that's basically all you need to know to understand this whole crazy process. But my questions are pretty simple. I actually like to speak for, I get a lot of questions from the group from people who do not have perfect kids. And so what would you say to, and there's a lot about chasing merit and all of that, and I don't think that's worthwhile for people who are, who do not have perfect kids and who do not have a high income. So what would you say to those people who say, you know, my kid's not going to win a Nobel Prize, and hasn't started a foundation and, you know, it's got a C+ average, what would you say to them when they're looking for a college?
First of all, thank you for those kind words. It means the world to hear that from a, quasi insider, or which is what you are when you're married to one, I guess.
Yeah.
So thank you. I guess I would say a couple things. First of all, I saw a comment go by about 90 seconds ago that said something to the effect of, that's a lot of crap to expect of ... And then I didn't see the rest of it. But yes, right. The downside of this system is that a lot of crap is expected of us. And, until we can blow the system up, the only way we can beat it is by, doing all that crap and doing an above average amount of it. I don't like it either. A lot, some of the critiques of the book have been like, why isn't Ron more angry? I am angry, I'm frustrated, right? But the best thing I can do to help right now is to help people navigate the system as it exists, right? So, so that's the bad part about the system. The good part about the system is that more than I think in any other country on the face of the planet, probably by a long way, there's a school for everybody here. There's so many open access schools, just about all of the community colleges are open access. And there's a fair number of, hundreds, I think, of four-year schools that are effectively open access, right? So, just because a kid has a C+ average doesn't mean there isn't a really good place for them to go. So I'd start there. I'd also mention the fact that, I can't let go of this gap year thing. Gap years are not just for, rich kids gallivanting around Europe. Gap years are for teenagers who have no business going to college at the age of 18. And really, what 18-year-old does have any business going to college, right? I mean, adolescent brains are not fully formed until whatever the latest, science says, 23, 24, 25. College is wasted to a certain extent on 18-year-olds. And there's a lot of great perspective that can come from going to do something else, anything else really in the world other than be in another classroom for 4 years. So, if it's working a minimum wage job, if it's palatable and possible and safe to live at home, great. If it's joining the US Armed Forces, terrific. The GI Bill will, pay for most of all of your college, and you'll be mature and you might have a better sense of what you want to study and do. And so, there's no rule saying that everybody's got to go at the age of 18. And, you just might get, more merit aid if you've gone out and done something interesting in the world that causes the school to believe that you'd be a more valuable asset to the classroom, right? So it can actually help you financially in a number of ways. I would say that the instructors at, many community colleges are spectacular. And I would argue that the overall quality of instruction at community colleges probably is better on average than the overall quality of instruction at large universities, where a lot of the teaching is done by graduate students or adjuncts, right? So, a kid can go to community college for a couple of years, find the thing that they're passionate about, hopefully, or at least grow and mature as a student, and then find their way to a 4-year school and shoot the lights out, right? And so I should define my terms. I think we journalists spend more time than we should, writing about more selective institutions. I don't know about the should. We spend more time writing about selective institutions than we do about less selective institutions, because it is our assumption, and I believe it's a correct one, that especially for people like me who are service journalists, right, who are writing to be useful, that the majority, maybe the vast majority, at least of my readers, they have aspirations for their kids to go to more selective institutions, and that I'm doing them a service by telling them how those institutions work. But I know that not every New York Times reader is like that, and not every child of a New York Times reader is like that either. And so this is yet another reminder that all of us need to do better by them. But I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Now, my other question, I'm going to get you in trouble because I am always going on about people being very careful. There's this sort of movement in the group where people think they can save money by going to community college, which technically is true, which in my experience, just does not happen most of the time. So I'm going to let you say it because I read your chapter and I know your thoughts on it, so I don't have to get in trouble for once.
Yeah, look, it can totally work, right? But here's what has to happen. You've got to get to community college with like a super type A attitude, and a head of steam, and knowledge of exactly where you want to transfer to and what you want to study there. Why? Because you've got to have exactly the right courses in exactly the right sequence at community college, in order for them to transfer in exactly the right way to your intended institution and in the intended department. So how can you, as a 17 or 18-year-old with no particular experience in community college administration or a parent of a kid like that, figure that out? Well, your kid needs to find like the best advisor at the community college who helps get people to their next stop. And then they need to find an admissions officer at the intended next stop who deals with the community college transfers, and the head of the department where they intend to study, who hopefully doesn't resent a large number of community college students coming each year, who are not filling his or her intro courses, thus depriving him of revenue and faculty slots because people are trying to beat the system by starting in community college in order to save money, right? And you basically need to like sleep at the foot of the bed of like all three of these people at least once every 6 weeks and get in their faces and be like, has anything changed? Am I doing it right? Have I scheduled the right courses for the next quarter, right? And then just keep asking that again and again and again and again for 2 years to make sure that you don't mess it up. A lot of people mess it up. And then it takes 4.5 years or 5.5 years or 6 years. And then you haven't saved as much money. And then you're not getting into the workforce as quickly. And then the savings, start to evaporate. So that's the danger, right? I'm not trying to talk anybody out of this. I just want people going in with the proper mindset and the proper plan to do and get what they intend.
Yeah, exactly. I call it the 10-year, 4-year degree program. So that's what happens most of the time. All right, and I'm done. So if you have questions for people, Debbie.
Okay. Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, Greg. So Ron, let's switch quickly. Because again, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of families kind of in this appeal stage. And like, what would be your best, most practical advice for all of those families who have gotten, most of the people have gotten a merit, offer of some sort, but it's still just not enough?
Yeah. So I guess, the basics first, which I guess the majority of people don't need, but just, remember who it is you're supposed to be going to, right? A need-based award, you take that to the financial aid department. Merit aid award, you take that to the admissions office. If we're talking about merit here for the most part, ideally, you can walk into the institution with another offer in your hand, from a competing institution, and it isn't always easy to figure out for sure what institution competes with what, but a good college counselor can help you figure that out. And if they're roughly comparable in test scores, GPA, selectivity, and they're relatively nearby regionally, you can go in with a straight face thinking they're comparable. So hopefully you're walking in with an offer from a competing institution that's better. Now let's make sure we're defining better correctly, because sometimes people will anchor to the size of the merit aid award that is offered. And when people walk into the office, or walk into the virtual office at the admissions office saying, well, hey, Lawrence University, you only offered me $31,000, but Beloit offered me 35. And then they look at the offer and they're like, you understand you're going to pay less at Lawrence, right? Or like, it's that may not be true, right? But this is a long way of saying what you're looking for is the actual bottom line price, right? What is the bottom line price you're being asked to pay? Because the school is probably not going to want to talk to you, if you've done that math wrong. And in fact, they will go to conferences and make fun of you in front of their colleagues. I've seen this happen at industry conferences where they make fun of people for this very thing, for people getting anchored to the size of the award and not to whatever the bottom line price is. So anyway, so hopefully you've got a better offer. And then I think you go in with great humility, not aggressiveness, right? You don't know what kind of situation as any school is in on any given day in April. You don't know whether they're ahead of where they want to be or behind where they want to be. And in a year as wacko as this one, there's just no way to predict it, right? So you just go in with humility and you say, hey, these bottom line prices aren't the same. There's a pretty good chance that, the kid here would go to your school if they were, or if yours was a little cheaper. And we think we may have done something wrong here. Like, it's possible we may have made a mistake in the application that caused things to end up this way. And is it possible that we could just kind of review what happened here to make sure that we didn't do anything wrong? We're not accusing you of having done it wrong. We're not criticizing your algorithm. We're gonna pretend that it wasn't an algorithm that made this offer, right? We're gonna pretend we don't know any of that, right? We're just gonna do one of these. We're gonna do one of these, and we're gonna walk in and say, we think we might have messed up here. And while we're talking, could we talk about, all of the great things that, our kid has done in the last 3 or 4 months since they wrote the essay or sent in the application, just to give you a sense of, what the kid has done to, advance him or herself to get themselves ready for college. And then you can have a conversation, right? Because these schools, they don't want to feel like it's a negotiation. When you hear them say, oh, our school doesn't negotiate, I mean, that's just like wordsmanship. That's gamesmanship. They don't believe having a conversation about the bottom line price is actually negotiation. I don't know what they think it is, but let's just let them have that, right?
Right.
Let's just think of it as a conversation where we're coming in with humility and see what happens, right? Because the worst that's going to happen is they'll say no. But years ago, but not so long ago that the data wasn't useful, I actually went to 20 or so schools to talk to them about need-based appeals, not merit appeals. But I think the data is probably similar. And I said, what's the batting average for families? You measure the number of calls you get each April and what percentage of them result in a change. And a lot of them did measure it or were able to come up with estimates, and the numbers were 70%, 40%, 55%, 1 of 3. And I was like, this is a lot better than baseball, right?
Right.
And
people are actually kind of pleasantly surprised, who in the past few weeks, that they just kind of go back with a nice letter that, or email that you're talking about. And at a minimum, people have easily gotten $2,000-3,000 per year. That's not bad for just kind of asking simply. But I am kind of curious, and I don't have a specific name of a college, but I have recently got some emails where people the colleges are now putting on their websites, or they might have actually put it on the financial aid offer that to stop some of this maybe, and they're clearly saying, we have no more money to give out. We will not we do not have any sort of appeals process.
So I'd be interested in seeing that if that's the case. I mean, if you're a school that is radically ahead of, plan or budget, maybe you can afford to do that on April 16th to just stop the inflow of calls. More power to them if they can. The other thing I should have mentioned that I forgot to is that Mark Kantrowitz, who's the sort of, savant of need-based aid, wrote a whole book, 140 pages or something, on negotiating your financial aid award. Some of it's pretty technical, but if you really want to geek out on this stuff, Mark has done it. And, there's probably a fair bit to be learned from that if you really want the crash course and want to suck that down.
And do you think that even if your child was offered nothing, that you could still go back and kind of, in all the ways that you just described, still ask for something?
Yeah, it's the most amazing thing. I feel like Santa Claus sometimes. Actually, I'm Jewish and this other guy was Jewish, but whatever the equivalent is, right? So Yeah, I got this. So, I mean, this was like the worst possible scenario. I don't know why. This is a very smart, successful person. And as many of us know, like we've seen it in our circles, there are very smart, successful people who just blow this process completely. They think they know what they're doing, or they don't bother figuring it out, or they don't even realize that it's like a whole complex system, and they just mess it all up. So, right. So, his kid applies early decision to Syracuse, right? They don't qualify for much need-based aid. They don't qualify for any need-based aid, but they're not rolling in it, right? And so, writing that $70,000 or $75,000 check is going to be a real stretch. And so he like comes to me sheepishly. The kid has already gotten in ED, right? So they're, in theory committed, although could back out and, break her heart. But, they'd made her this promise that they would pay for, whatever, right? So there they are. And he comes to me like the beginning of January and he's like, is there anything we can do now about this? And I'm thinking, probably not, but you can, and I'm thinking to myself, I still don't actually know a ton about, I don't think I've looked at the common data set for Syracuse. I don't think they do a ton of merit aid, but I knew they do a little. And I said, look, you can't win if you don't play. And so he just, wrote them a note, and like he got a note back a day later with $5,000 a year. And he's like, Ron, you just gave us $20,000 back.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's like, wow, well, go write an Amazon review of the book, and that'll be my payback.
Well, I mean, that's the lesson I think hopefully people are hearing, kind of you're weaving through, is that like, don't be afraid to ask for the information you need, and don't be afraid to, appeal and ask the college for more money, because there's very few people who can pay, all these prices without some help.
Yeah. And, I toss this off as if it's nothing. And let me just be clear that like, it's not nothing. Like, I get that some of you, either by the, sort of the personality that you were born with or inherited, or by whatever place or station you come from or have found yourself in life, it's hard to summon up the will to ask for things generally, right? Or to ask for money in particular. And so I don't mean to be casual about it, but I do mean to be animated, right? Because as hard as it may be, right, that one letter, got that family 20 grand. I mean, that's a lot of money, right? And it seems to be just there for the asking, like 38% of the time, or whatever the number is that we will actually never know, because it's one of the frustrating things that we will never know about the process. But we know your odds are good, and we know it doesn't really take much effort, even though if it feels like a big ask psychologically in many instances.
Right.
So, just like take a deep breath, right? Like summon up the will.
I mean, and not only that, and I never took a negotiation class, and I'm not saying I'm a negotiator, but you're in the best position. The student has been accepted. You have nothing to lose.
They're not going to take your acceptance away.
Right, right.
And they're not going to make fun of you, and they're not going to, it's like, there really is a no-lose situation.
Okay, last question, and we could go on for hours, but it's getting very late. But last question for the families who have, sophomores and juniors. Can you talk a little bit about the merit pre-read, situation that you talk about in the book, and this kind of goes along the same vein about asking for stuff from the colleges.
Yeah, so this is a campaign that I'm waging, and it sort of feels like I'm doing it single-handedly. So let's see, we're still at 573. If all 573 of you could join my crusade here, or however many of you have got, juniors or sophomores on your hand or younger, this is what I'm asking of you. We still have a merit aid predictability problem in this industry and in the shopping experience. And yes, right, University of Alabama publishes their grid. And yes, Wabash College publishes their grid. And yes, Lake Forest College publishes the grid, right? And, hats off to those institutions, although we could complain until the cows come home about, basing this off of test scores. And obviously it hasn't been possible. this year. I was glad to see that Alabama stood down from that approximately 72 hours after I called them out in the newspaper for it. So I feel good about that. But anyway, what I want is for these institutions to do what the College of Worcester in Ohio and Whitman College started doing it just in the past year. Worcester's been doing it for a couple of years. There may be one or two others that do it too formally, and there are others that may informally. And what I'm talking about is a merit aid pre-read. So what does that mean exactly? Well, come August or September, when the wheels start to turn in the admissions offices, and you've got a senior, you can go to Worcester, you can go to Whitman and engage in a sort of formal process where you send them, the basic academic data, and you send them, the financial data, and they will come back to you with what is in effect a nearly binding estimate of what kind of merit aid offer your kid might get if they were to get in. And that includes early decision, early action. I can't remember whether Worcester has ED or not. I think it does.
I think they do.
And I'm almost positive Whitman does, right? And so my question for the world and for you, right? If College of Worcester can do it, then why can't Denison University, an hour down the road, right? If Whitman can do it, well, why not Occidental, down in LA? Why not Colorado College? Or, whatever it is, whoever it is that Whitman competes with most often in the small liberal arts arena. And if enough people start asking this, a groundswell will begin to emerge where, the institutions will start to scratch their head and, say, all these like college shoppers out there, they're onto us. And there's sort of something to this idea that we should not force people to apply to an institution with the price tag of over $250,000 without knowing within $100,000 what they'll actually be asked to pay if they get in. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense at all, right? Maybe at some point the federal government gets involved. I mean, the federal government got involved to protect lower income people, to be like, look, if you're going to charge this much money, you should have a net price calculator that tells people how much need-based aid they might get if they got in. Now, some of you who are really geeked out on this, some of the net price calculators do predict merit aid, and hats off to the schools that do it. It's not always clearly labeled, right? But there's still dozens and dozens and dozens of very appealing institutions that want nothing to do with merit aid predictability. So I would love it if all of you would be calling them up, those institutions, in September and October and asking for a merit aid pre-read. And if they won't give it to you, tell them Ron Lieber sent you, and your next call is to Ron Lieber. And send me an email through my website and tell me who they are, because I'm going to start making a list of names.
Well, great. We're going to push people this fall, because I think it's important. And, as you were saying that, everything that just went into my mind was, in other financial products like loans, you get pre-qualified. You get to know what your interest rate is like before you make that big commitment. So, it's not at all a foreign concept. And as we've been talking all night, this is a huge financial, commitment for families. So the last thing I just want to say is if you, hopefully you're kind of hearing this whole night, and this is, I think, a little bit my belief, I think Ron buys into it, is that I view the college industry as a business. Like, I think for so many years, we've kind of looked at it like as academics, the Ivy Tower, like we're afraid to kind of like look at it in a different way, but they are a business. And sometimes you have to just apply business principles for how things are operating.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense to me. Debbie, I feel like I've totally missed out on all the fun in the chat tonight. Stacy, I think that was her name, who just described herself as a professional pest. Whatever that is, I want to know more about that. So Stacy, all of you, I'm easy to find. Ron at ronlieber.com. I try to answer every email I get. Sometimes it's hard, but things are a little calmer than they were a couple months ago. So I want to hear your stories. And, if there's anything that I said that you thought was ridiculous and you want to call me on or challenge me on, I particularly love those notes because I'm always trying to get better and get smarter.
Here, Stacy said, I'm a professional pest. I'm totally going to ask schools for a merit pre-read.
Great.
So you converted somebody.
Excellent. Please let me know how it goes. I want to report back.
Okay, thank you so much, Ron. I really appreciate all your time and, here and in the group and writing the book. It's fabulous. And thanks everybody for showing up tonight. We just appreciate all that you're doing to kind of teach people about the system, and, and together we can kind of maybe chip away at it.
Thank you. And thank you to Leanne and Greg and George. It's nice to see your live faces in person, and I'll see the rest of you on Facebook.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.